What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Fantasy Stock Exchange here, and today I'll be going through my top waiver wire ads entering week 3 of fantasy football and highlighting some of the top performances and storylines of the weekend and how you can properly adjust going into week 3 of your fantasy football teams. And yeah, we saw a ton of action happen in week 2 of fantasy football. And as you guys know, as I have said multiple times, waivers are a fundamental piece towards building out your teams in fantasy football. You rely on your studs. Well, waivers are helping you build those fantasy football lineups from top to bottom, building out that depth. And hopefully you won your matchups. But even if you didn't, I'll be outlining 5 main players to pick up in fantasy football, 3 honorable mentions, as well as 3 quarterback and defense streamers that I like to target in week 3. If you guys enjoy the content, as always, make sure you leave a like down below. And as always, if you are new to the channel, you have not seen FSC before, hit that subscribe button. It helps us a lot in terms of growing in that YouTube algorithm. But before we get into it, as always, we're going to hit the intro. All right, for the purpose of this video, I'll be sticking to players with a roster percentage of 50% or under. And starting it off with number 5 on the list, we go to the running back of the New York Jets in Michael Carter, who currently has a 49% roster percentage via Yahoo Fantasy Football. And to outline kind of what he did in week 2, we saw at New England, he was able to produce 11 carries for 59 rushing yards and 2 receptions on 3 targets for 29 receiving yards for a total 9.8 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. And in week 3, he actually travels on the road to play the Denver Broncos. And this is a guy who's trending up after a slow, sluggish, quote unquote, week 1. Really a good rookie adaptation week, if you will, in week 1. But we saw his role really expand in week 2, as you guys can see on the screen. He is the most talented running back on this team. And the fact of the matter is he led this team in opportunities in week 2, as well as tying Ty Johnson for the lead in snap rate at 45%. If this is a sign for things to come, if Michael Carter is taking that next step in being the Jets' main number 1 running back, he is going to be well worth your fab. And in terms of fab percentage, because he didn't have a quote unquote blow up game, you could probably get this guy, stash him on your bench for about 5 to 10% of your fab, which in my opinion is an absolute bargain play on this week's waiver wire. So enough on Michael Carter. We've talked about him a lot on the channel before, but going into number 4 on the list, and a guy that Bush was very high on coming out of the draft in 2020, the first wide receiver taken in that draft, that's actually going to be Henry Ruggs, wide receiver of the Las Vegas Raiders, currently rostered in 35% of Yahoo leagues. And we saw this guy have a nice little breakout game last week, to say the least, week 2 at the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was able to record 5 receptions on 7 targets for 113 receiving yards and 1 touchdown, as well as contributing a carry for 2 yards for a total half PPR output of 20 points against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And in week 3 goes to play the Miami Dolphins at home. And we saw it. He got the second most snaps of this wide receiver core, only trailing Bryan Edwards, who, if you want to throw a dart at that guy, I think that's a fine play as well. And in my opinion, outside of obviously Darren Waller, has the most valuable role in terms of this whole wide receiver core for the Raiders, being the deep threat that he represents. And in my opinion, if you can get him for, let's say, 5% fab, I think he's a worthwhile stash with a guy that we really know has the talent to be able to produce. It just matters with the opportunity. And given the fact that he was able to command 7 targets, was able to get that 61-yard touchdown, was able to stretch the field the way he does, I'm more than fine taking Henry Ruggs and putting him at the end of my bench with flex appeal in case I need to throw him in a good matchup. So 5% should be able to get it done, but we can move off of Henry Ruggs and go to what's actually been another really good deep play threat and guy that nobody expected to come out, and that's going to be KJ Osborn, wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings, currently only rostered in 3% of Yahoo leagues, despite having a really strong performance in week 1, a guy that I mentioned in the week 2 waiver show. But in week 2, we saw him truly take that next step towards his ascension. He recorded 5 receptions on 6 targets for 91 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, totaling 17.6 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. And in week 3 is able to play the Seattle Seahawks, who we have seen got themselves accustomed to high scoring, high paced games in these past 2 weeks. And the thing that really intrigues me about KJ Osborn is this isn't just a blip in the radar. This isn't just a guy that was thrown out low volume, just was able to do a couple plays similar to like an MVS type back in 2018. No, this is a guy that is legitimately commanded targets, commanded playing time, and a team in the Minnesota Vikings with the Irv Smith injury has transitioned to a 3 wide receiver set type of team. As you guys can see via Adam Leviton on Twitter, he actually tweeted this out, but he has played KJ Osborn 103 of the 144 snaps for the Minnesota Vikings offense, aka 71% snap rate. And he has run 78 routes on 87 Kirk Cousins dropbacks for an 89.6 rate, totaling an 18.2% target share in these first 2 weeks. This to me seems like a guy that can develop and ascend into that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 territory. We see a guy like this kind of happen every year. Nobody expected the Minnesota Vikings to be that 11 personnel, high octane passing offense, but that's really what they've developed to be. And KJ Osborn has shown out in his opportunity. So I think this is a guy that can truly ascend into that flex territory for you on a weekly basis. And in matchups similar to week 2, where he's playing a Arizona Cardinals type of team, or a high pace, high scoring team. Like, for example, they played the Dallas Cowboys this year. I think KJ Osborn has legitimate potential to return a high amount of output in your lineup. So absolutely love KJ Osborn. If you're willing to spend 10% of your fab, maybe in more stingier leagues, you probably have to pay 15%. I'm fine with that because I feel like he's going to be a very worthwhile piece on your bench for the rest of the season. I genuinely believe this role is locked and loaded on that Minnesota Vikings passing offense. But off of KJ Osborn, let's talk about the guy who's the number 2 overall weapon on his team. That's going to be Darnell Mooney, wide receiver of the Chicago Bears, currently only rostered in 45% of Yahoo leagues. And this is one that really surprised me because Darnell Mooney coming into the year had a decent amount of hype. We all know Allen Robinson is the main alpha on that team, but aside from Allen Robinson, they needed somebody to step up in that weapons core. And Darnell Mooney was still a rookie wide receiver last year that was able to produce over 600 receiving yards and looked good despite poor quarterback play. Well, thus far this year, as we saw in week 2 versus the Cincinnati Bengals, he was able to record 6 receptions on 8 targets for 66 receiving yards and 9.6 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. And in week 3, travels on the road to play the Cleveland Browns. What I've really taken away from these first 2 games is that Darnell Mooney is the clear number 2 passing weapon in this offense. Obviously, we know Allen Robinson's the alpha here, but he's been able to garner 15 targets in these first 2 games this year. And it's really similar to what we saw with Corey Davis ascending last year, in a guy that has the talent, now has the opportunity to be the number 2 ancillary weapon, obviously behind A-Rob, a la what Corey Davis was to A.J. Brown. And I think this is an offense that could ultimately be unleashed once Fields inevitably takes over, because it won't be long before they realize they cannot suffice the rest of the year going with Andy Dalton at quarterback. And for the record, I mean, this past week against the Cincinnati Bengals, we saw Darnell Mooney operate as that clear cut second in command to Allen Robinson, actually out snapping and running more routes than Allen Robinson, en route to doubling his targets. So we could be in store for a nice little Mooney breakout year after a rookie year hindered by poor quarterback play. In terms of fab percentage, if this guy's available on your waiver wire, I am fine with spending 20+% of my fab on him, because I genuinely believe we're looking at a wide receiver 4 archetype for the rest of the year. And if we were to redraft fantasy football drafts, he would find himself in that round 10, round 11 type range. So 20% of your fab for that type of player, that type of upside at the wide receiver position, is well worth it, in my opinion, with Darnell Mooney. But transitioning off of Darnell Mooney, who was the number 2 overall waiver pickup, we're heading on to the number 1 waiver pickup of the week. And buckle up, y'all, because this kid has absolutely looked special thus far. And if you're confused who I'm talking about, I mean, it's going to be Rondale Moore, wide receiver from the Arizona Cardinals, currently only rostered in 34% of Yahoo leagues. And this is a guy in week 2 versus the Minnesota Vikings was able to produce 7 receptions on 8 targets for 114 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown, en route to a 20.9 half PPR performance in this week. And these past 2 weeks, we have seen Rondale Moore do so much with so little in terms of opportunity. I mean, he posted 68 receiving yards in his first game as a professional, 114 yards and a touchdown in his second game. The snap percentage, the route percentage, everything has not even been there yet. This guy has taken advantage of every single opportunity he's had. And for the record, if you guys don't know what the Arizona Cardinals, which you should by now, Kyler Murray he could very well be the consensus quarterback one. I mean, what this guy's been able to do when he's healthy is absolutely unmatched. You have the pace of the offense. You have the fourth highest neutral game script passing rate of any team in the NFL. I mean, this is a team in the Arizona Cardinals that can support multiple pieces in the offense. We know what DeAndre Hopkins represents. I genuinely believe that Rondale Moore is going to end up being the number 2 weapon in a very good offense. And it's just crazy to see because Jared Small actually tweeted this, but although he still had a limited opportunity overall, we saw his opportunity take a huge spike from week 1 to week 2. You guys can see it on the screen. In week 1, only logged a 29% snap rate, which rose to 46% in week 2. Route rate went from 38% to 57%, and his target share went from 15.6% to 22.2%, which actually led the team. And it's pretty remarkable when you think that he was only running a route on 57% of total routes in the game, yet he was able to garner a 22% target rate. This guy is a beast. This guy works at all levels of the field, and I may have to eat crow. I genuinely thought that he would take a little bit of a transition period to develop into a full-fledged NFL wide receiver, but Rondale Moore has looked fantastic thus far. And if he can end up getting that wide receiver 2 role, getting more snaps over Christian Kirk and AJ Green, I think this is a legitimate wide receiver 3 for the rest of the year if he's able to develop into that. So in terms of fab, you're talking about a potential wide receiver 3 off the waiver wire, a guy that could probably be an 8th round pick if you were to redraft today. I'm willing to spend 25+% to ensure this guy is on the end of my bench, given the amount of upside he has. So those are the top 5 waivers that I like for this week. Talking about the best of the rest, the 3 guys that are either over 50% or guys that I just think shouldn't really be available in your leagues, but if they are, go scoop them up. Let's start with Tony Pollard, running back for the Dallas Cowboys, rostered just above the threshold in 53% of Yahoo leagues. And we saw what he was able to do against the LA Chargers. I mean, 140 total yards from scrimmage and a touchdown. And this looks to be a situation in Dallas where both these backs can thrive. This really reminds me a couple years ago when we saw Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler both be very complementary pieces and both be very steady pieces in fantasy football. I genuinely believe we're looking at Zeke Elliott probably as a back-end RB2 with Tony Pollard potentially being a high-end RB3 rest of the season with, obviously, as you know, if anything were to happen to Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard has RB1 upside. So for that amount of potential, for that amount of standalone value to be on your waiver wire, Tony Pollard is probably a 40+% fab type of guy. So if he was available in less than 50%, he would be the number 1 waiver this week, but obviously not meeting the threshold. He goes in best of the rest. But moving on, next player, Elijah Moore, wide receiver for the New York Jets, rostered in only 31% of Yahoo leagues. And this guy's available on your waiver wire. I mean, you've watched the channel before. You would know our thoughts on Elijah Moore, but go scoop him up. Lack of production thus far has really come from Zach Wilson's struggles, but this is a guy, as a rookie, still led the Jets this week in snap percentage and was second on the team in targets in week 2, despite this being his second career game. So Jared Small tweeted this out, logged 81% of the wide receiver routes in week 2. So I think Elijah Moore is ready for ascension, and I'm sure Corey's going to be talking about him a little bit in the trade target show, but I don't know what he's doing. But either way, if Elijah Moore's available, go scoop him up. Last guy that I'm going to mention of in the best of the rest is actually going to be a guy that I target a lot in the last round of my best ball drafts. I thought that the talent facing this opportunity would eventually win out, and that's going to be Pat Freiermuth, tight end for the Pittsburgh Steelers, currently only rostered in 7% of Yahoo leagues. And this is a guy that we saw this past week garner 4 targets and outsnapped and ran more routes than Eric Ebron. You guys can see that on the screen, but he actually logged 33 snaps to Eric Ebron's 24 and ran 23 routes to Eric Ebron's 18. In due time, I think he can eventually not only eclipse Eric Ebron, but potentially have a stranglehold on this tight end room. So love the talent, love the opportunity that Pat Freiermuth has to eventually be a potential tight end 2 in fantasy with obvious tight end 1 upside if he gets the full role. So love what Freiermuth can bring to the table. But off of these best of the rest, these 3 best of the rest, let's go on to the quarterbacks and defenses I like to stream this week. Starting off at quarterback, Teddy Bridgewater of the Denver Broncos going up week 3 against the New York Jets. And we're able to see in week 2 him absolutely slice and dice the Jacksonville Jaguars defense for 21.22 fantasy points. And we have seen the Jets absolutely struggle in these first 2 weeks. Got blown out in both games against the Carolina Panthers and obviously the New England Patriots. I think it's going to be more of the same. Denver completely out hustles them. And I think not only Teddy Bridgewater, but Courtland Sutton, Tim Patrick, Noah Fant are all in store for huge games against this struggling Jets defense. So give me Teddy Bridgewater. Next player on the list, I mentioned him when talking about going against the Jets, but Sam Darnold, quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, going week 3 on Thursday Night Football at the Houston Texans. And we've seen this guy truly develop into a steady fantasy football force. He's currently the quarterback 16 on the season, and against a Houston Texans defense that is simply not good. I know the first couple weeks they haven't looked like an absolute dumpster fire, but I think again we're going to see the Texans of old end up coming out. And even if they don't, if they're an average defense in this game, Sam Darnold and the weapons he has at his disposal will equate to a near 20-point type of performance in week 3. And if you're streaming the quarterback, that's all you're really looking for. If they can get that 20-point threshold, I see that fully in the grasp for Sam Darnold. And finally, leveling off these quarterbacks to stream list, Daniel Jones of the New York Giants going week 3 versus the Atlanta Falcons. A Falcons defense that we have seen absolutely get sliced up for over 30 fantasy points conceded to the quarterback position in back-to-back weeks. And I think Daniel Jones is no different. I mean, I understand that as a passer, he's not even close to Tom Brady. And as a rusher, he's not even what Jalen Hurts is. But he presents a challenge to a Falcons defense that has gotten absolutely decimated thus far. And we've seen sneaky upside in terms of the rushing game with Daniel Jones. He's got the athleticism. He's looked decent enough as a passer to manipulate this Falcons secondary. So if I'm in a struggle and I don't know who to start at the quarterback position this week, getting Daniel Jones is a, fringe top 20 type of option. You get him for cheap, for free off the waivers. I think he can give you a solid performance at the quarterback spot. So fine with Daniel Jones. Moving off the quarterbacks, let's go into defenses to stream this week. Starting off, Carolina Panthers at the Houston Texans on Thursday Night Football, only rostered in 20% of Yahoo leagues. And this is a Panthers defense that has looked absolutely frightening in these first 2 games, conceding a total of 21 points, putting it on a clinic in terms of pressure. We got Hassan Reddick and Brian Burns absolutely dominating off the edge right now. And now go on the road on Thursday Night Football against a Texans team that just lost Tyrod Taylor. The Texans could be in trouble this one. I think the Panthers defense has a legitimate chance to put up 10 plus fantasy points in default scoring leagues. So absolutely love the Panthers this week in a potential stream. Another team that I like, Las Vegas Raiders, going to play the Miami Dolphins at home, only 2% rostered, and going up against Miami and Jacoby Brissett with the Tua Tagovailoa news of him being hurt. It's a no-brainer here. That Dolphins offense has struggled. That offensive line has absolutely struggled. And we have seen this Raiders pass rush really take over these last 2 games. So I'm perfectly fine with rolling out the Raiders defense in this one, going up against the Dolphins. And finally, wrapping up the video at 49% rostered, we're going to talk about the Arizona Cardinals going on the road against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jaguars are an offense that has absolutely struggled. Trevor Lawrence has had his rookie flaws showing out in these first couple games, and they haven't really not only been able to move the ball, but they have turned the ball over at an incredibly high rate. And we see that the Cardinals present a genuine pass rush to the table here. I mean, Chandler Jones is currently leading the league in sacks. This is a defense that has made plays in each of the last 2 games. So I think the Cardinals will be able to put on another strong performance from a defensive standpoint. And man, it's going to be fun given the way that obviously the Cardinals are going to be able to put pressure from the offensive standpoint. We should see plenty of opportunities to rack up sacks, force fumbles on the other end, with hypothetically the Jaguars trying to play catch-up ball in this one. So absolutely love the Cardinals defense. But anyways, if you made it this far in the video, you enjoyed the content thus far, leave a like down below. And as always, pay attention to today's Trade Target show coming out in a few hours, but we'll be releasing that. So stay tuned. Love you guys. As always, peace out.